Welcome back to Tina Romance Library, where powerful alphas fall hard, and the women they underestimate change everything. Every story here is complete, immersive, and emotion-driven. No cliffhangers, no rushed endings, just full romances you can sink into. Today's story? It starts with a small mistake, the kind that puts a woman in an unpredicted love triangle. She wanted to spite her ex. For being rejected, she kisses a masked stranger at a festival only to discover she's accidentally claimed the alpha king who's been desperately searching for his mate. What follows is a complete werewolf romance of destiny, politics, and the valuable life lesson that you should always confirm a man's job title before kissing him in public. So if you love possessive alphas, strong heroines who don't beg, slow burn tension, and emotional payoffs, you're in the right place. I need you to join the pack right now by subscribing. Leave a like if you enjoy immersive romance. And settle in because once the story begins, we don't stop until the ending. Now, let's get into it. I should have known better than to kiss a stranger at a masquerade ball. But there I was standing in the middle of the Lunar Court's grand terrace, surrounded by swirling gowns and glittering masks, watching my ex-mate wrap his arm around another woman like I'd never existed. Like the 2 years we spent together had been erased with a single rejection. And maybe they had been. Maybe that's how it works when you're deemed not enough for someone who once swore you were his everything. The air smelled like jasmine and champagne, too sweet, too perfect, like the universe was mocking me. Lanterns hung from every archway, casting golden light across marble floors, and the orchestra played something romantic and utterly unbearable. Everyone was laughing, dancing, celebrating under a sky full of stars that felt like they were watching me break apart. I could feel the weight of curious eyes on me, whispers hidden behind painted fans and crystal goblets. They all knew. Of course they knew. News travels fast in wolf packs, faster still when it's about someone's humiliation. And tonight? Tonight I was the entertainment. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Marcus, my former mate, the man I thought I'd spend my life with, he stood there, tall and proud in his midnight blue suit, his hand resting possessively on her waist. Celeste, of all people. Beautiful, poised, and from a bloodline that apparently mattered more than any bond we'd ever shared. She smiled up at him like she'd won some grand prize. And maybe she had. Maybe I was just the obstacle she'd stepped over to get there. My chest felt tight. My wolf was restless, pacing inside me, humiliated and furious in equal measure. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. I wanted to disappear into the shadows and never return. But I couldn't. Because running would mean they'd won. It would mean I was exactly what Marcus had called me when he severed our bond week. Forgettable. Ordinary. So I did something stupid instead. I grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing server, downed it in one burning gulp, and turned on my heel. My heart was hammering against my ribs, my hands shaking, but I kept my chin up. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Not here. Not now. That's when I saw him. A man standing alone near the edge of the terrace, half hidden in shadow, watching the crowd with an expression I couldn't quite read. He wore a black mask that covered the upper half of his face, sharp and elegant, like something carved from night itself. His suit was perfectly tailored, his posture commanding even in stillness. And when his gaze shifted just slightly and landed on me, I felt it like a spark against dry kindling. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just moved. Maybe it was the champagne. Maybe it was the rage boiling under my skin. Maybe it was the desperate, reckless need to prove that I was still desirable, still wanted, still worth something to someone, even a stranger. I crossed the terrace in a blur of silk and determination, my heels clicking against the stone, my pulse roaring in my ears. He didn't move as I approached, didn't step back or question me. He just watched, his head tilting slightly, curiosity flickering in the dark eyes behind that mask. And then I kissed him. I pressed my lips to his without hesitation, without introduction, without a single rational thought in my head. His mouth was warm, firm, and for a heartbeat, just one, he went completely still. Shocked, maybe, or confused. I didn't care. I needed this. I needed to feel like I had some control, like I could choose something for myself instead of being chosen or discarded by someone else. But then he kissed me back. Oh gods, he kissed me back. His hand came up to cup the side of my face, gentle but possessive, and suddenly the world around us disappeared. The music faded. The laughter dimmed. There was only his scent, clean and woodsy with something darker underneath, something that made my wolf sit up and take notice. His lips moved against mine with a confidence that stole my breath, and I felt the power radiating off him like heat from a flame. This wasn't just any stranger, but I didn't know that yet. When he finally pulled back, his thumb brushed along my jaw, and I saw the faintest curve of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "Bold," he murmured, his voice low and smooth with an edge that sent a shiver down my spine. I stepped back, suddenly mortified. What had I just done? I'd kissed a complete stranger in front of half the lunar court, in front of Marcus, in front of everyone. My voice came out breathless. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "Don't apologize," he said, and something in his tone made it sound less like a suggestion and more like a command. I turned and fled before I could do anything even more humiliating, weaving through the crowd with my heart racing and my thoughts spinning. I could still feel the ghost of his lips on mine, the warmth of his hand against my skin. I told myself it didn't matter, that it was just a moment of madness, a tiny rebellion that no one would remember by morning. I didn't know I had just kissed the Alpha King. I made it to the edge of the gardens before my legs gave out. Not literally. I didn't collapse or fall apart in some dramatic display, but I stopped walking, pressed my back against the cool stone of a pillar wrapped in ivy, and finally let myself breathe. Really breathe. The kind of shaky, uneven breaths that come when you've been holding everything together by sheer force of will, and you're not sure how much longer you can manage it. The music was softer here, muffled by distance and hedgerows. The laughter felt farther away. I could still see the glow of lanterns through the trees, still hear the murmur of voices, but for the first time all night, I felt like I could exist without being watched, without being judged, without being pitied. My fingers trembled as I pressed them against my lips, still tingling from that kiss. What had I been thinking? I hadn't, obviously. Thinking would have stopped me from doing something so monumentally stupid. But in that moment, with Marcus's arm around Celeste and every eye in the room silently dissecting my humiliation, I'd needed to feel something other than worthless. I'd needed to prove to him, to them, to myself that I was still desirable, that someone, anyone might want me even if my own mate hadn't. But the truth settled over me like a heavy cloak, suffocating and familiar. It didn't matter who I kissed. It didn't matter how I tried to reclaim my pride or rewrite the narrative, because at the end of the day, I was still the Omega no one chose, the one who'd been weighed, measured, and found lacking in the one way that mattered most to wolves like us. Barren. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I'd heard it whispered behind my back more times than I could count. Seen it in the sideways glances, the careful distance people kept when they thought I wasn't looking. It was stamped across my reputation like a brand, defining me in ways I'd never asked for and couldn't escape. In our world, an Omega's worth is tied to one thing above all else: the ability to bear strong pups, to carry on bloodlines, to secure alliances and strengthen packs through the children we bring into the world. It's not fair, it's not right, but it's the way things are, the way they've always been. And when you can't do that, when your body refuses to cooperate no matter how many healers you see or how many prayers you whisper to the moon goddess, you become expendable. Marcus hadn't said it outright when he rejected me. He'd dressed it up in prettier words: "We're not compatible. We want different things. You deserve someone who can make you truly happy." But I'd seen the truth in his eyes, heard it in the careful way he avoided mentioning children. He'd found out about my condition 6 months into our bond, and everything had changed. The way he looked at me, the way he touched me, like I was fragile, broken, less than what he'd signed up for. It had taken him 1.5 years to finally sever the bond. 1.5 years of slow, agonizing distance, of watching him pull away inch by inch while I pretended everything was fine. And when he finally did it, when he stood in front of the pack elders and formally rejected me, I'd felt the snap of our connection like a physical wound, sharp and brutal and absolute. He'd moved on within weeks, found Celeste. With her pristine bloodline and proven fertility, she already had a daughter from a previous mate who'd died in battle. Perfect, acceptable, everything I could never be. And tonight? Tonight was the Harvest Moon Festival, a celebration of abundance and fertility and all the things I represented the opposite of. Of course Marcus would bring her here. Of course he'd parade their new bond in front of everyone, including me, as if to underline exactly why I hadn't been enough. My wolf whined softly in the back of my mind, a sound of hurt and confusion. She didn't understand why we'd been cast aside. In her world, bonds were sacred, absolute. The idea that someone could choose to break one was incomprehensible. And the idea that our worth could be measured by something we had no control over? That was even worse. We're more than this, I told her silently. We have to be. But even as I thought it, doubt crept in. Because what was I, really, without the ability to fulfill the one role Omegas were expected to play? I had no special skills, no rare talents. I wasn't a warrior or a healer or a scholar. I'd spent my life preparing to be a mate, a mother, the heart of a family. And now that future had been ripped away, leaving me adrift in a world that didn't know what to do with an Omega who couldn't produce heirs. I'd lost more than Marcus when he rejected me. I'd lost my place in the pack hierarchy, my standing in the community, the respect I'd taken for granted. People didn't know how to treat me anymore. I was an anomaly, a cautionary tale, a reminder of what could go wrong. Some Omegas in my position left their packs entirely, seeking out smaller communities where their status wasn't so rigidly defined. But I'd been born here, raised here. This was my home, even if it didn't feel like one anymore. And leaving would feel like admitting defeat, like confirming every cruel thing anyone had ever thought about me. So I stayed. I endured the whispers and the pity and the careful distance. I held my head high even when I wanted to scream. I pretended the rejection didn't haunt me every single day. But tonight had cracked something open inside me. Seeing Marcus with her, so happy, so complete, it had driven home just how disposable I'd been, how easy it had been for him to replace me. And that kiss, that reckless, desperate kiss with a stranger, had been my pathetic attempt to prove I still mattered. Except I didn't even know who he was. I'd thrown myself at a man whose face I couldn't fully see, whose name I didn't know, in a moment of pure self-destructive defiance. And for what? A few seconds of feeling wanted? A fleeting illusion that I was still desirable? Gods, I was a mess. A sharp laugh escaped me, bitter and hollow. My wolf stirred uneasily, picking up on my distress. She wanted to run, to shift and disappear into the forest where we could be wild and free and unburdened by pack politics. And maybe we would. Maybe after tonight, I'd finally stop pretending I could carve out a place for myself here. But then I remembered the way that stranger had kissed me back. The way his hand had cupped my face with a gentleness that contradicted the raw power I'd felt radiating from him. The way his scent had wrapped around me like smoke, dark and intoxicating and strangely familiar in a way I couldn't explain. For just a moment, I'd felt seen. Not as a broken Omega, or a rejected mate, or a cautionary tale. Just as me. As Aveline. And that terrified me more than anything else. Because hope, I'd learned, was the cruelest thing of all. I pushed off the pillar and forced myself to move, to walk deeper into the gardens where the shadows grew thicker and the voices faded to nothing. I needed distance, space, somewhere I could think without the weight of 100 judging eyes pressing down on me. But I only made it a few more steps before I felt it. A presence, strong and unmistakable, like a shift in the air pressure before a storm. My wolf went still, her attention snapping towards something or someone behind me. Every instinct I had screamed alpha, and not just any alpha, the kind of power that made lesser wolves drop their eyes and bare their throats without thinking. I turned slowly, my heart climbing into my throat. He stood at the edge of the garden path, partially silhouetted by the lantern light spilling from the terrace. The stranger, the man I'd kissed. He'd removed his mask, and even in the dim light, I could see the sharp angles of his face, the strong jaw, the dark eyes that tracked my every movement with an intensity that made my skin prickle. But it was more than that. It was the way he carried himself, like he owned not just the space he occupied, but everything around it. Like authority and command were woven into his very bones. And his scent, gods, his scent hit me again, stronger now without the crowd and the champagne to dull my senses. Pine and smoke and something wild, something that made my wolf perk up with interest and wariness in equal measure. "You ran," he said, his voice cutting through the quiet like a blade wrapped in velvet. "I left," I corrected, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's a difference." "Is there?" He moved closer, each step deliberate, measured. Not threatening exactly, but purposeful in a way that made me acutely aware of how alone we were. "You kissed me, then disappeared before I could even ask your name." Heat flooded my cheeks. That was a mistake. Was it? His head tilted slightly, studying me like I was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. It didn't feel like a mistake. My breath caught. Because he was right. It hadn't felt like a mistake in the moment. It had felt like fire and need and something deeper, something that had terrified me enough to run. "Who are you?" I asked, deflecting because I didn't know how else to handle the way he was looking at me. Something flickered across his expression. Amusement, maybe, or irony. "You really don't know." It wasn't a question. Should I? He was close enough now that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. Close enough that I could see the silver threading through the dark depths, the mark of an alpha bloodline. My pulse hammered against my throat, and I knew he could hear it, could probably smell the nervous energy rolling off me in waves. "Yes," he said quietly. "You should." Before I could respond, before I could demand an actual answer, voices drifted from the terrace, calling a name I'd heard 1,000 times but never in connection with a face I'd seen. "Your Majesty, the council is waiting." The world tilted. "Your Majesty." No, that wasn't possible. I would have known. Someone would have told me. Except no one had. Because why would they? Why would anyone think to warn an irrelevant Omega that the Alpha King himself might be attending the festival? I took a step back, then another, my mind reeling. "You're Roland Ashenblade," he confirmed, and there was something almost apologetic in his tone. Almost. "Alpha King of the Northern Territories." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I'd kissed the Alpha King, in front of half the lunar court, in front of witnesses and gossipers and people who would absolutely, definitely spread this story to every corner of every pack by sunrise. "Oh gods," I whispered. "Oh gods, I'm so sorry, I didn't. I never would have." "Stop," he said, and the command in his voice made my words die in my throat. "Don't apologize for that." "But Aveline." My name on his lips sent a shiver down my spine. I hadn't told him my name, which meant he'd found out, which meant he'd asked, which meant this was so much worse than I'd thought. "I have to go," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't have any of this." I turned to flee again, but his hand caught my wrist, gentle but firm enough to stop me. The contact sent a jolt through my entire body, and I hated how much I wanted to lean into it instead of pulling away. "Wait," he said, and there was something in his voice I couldn't identify, something that sounded almost like longing. "I need to..." But whatever he needed was cut off by another voice, sharper this time, edged with impatience. "Your Majesty, the Blood Moon Council cannot be kept waiting. The matter of your mate bond." Roland's jaw tightened, and he released my wrist. "I'm aware, Marcus." My stomach dropped. Marcus, of course. My ex-mate was part of the King's inner circle. I'd known that in an abstract way, but I'd never connected the dots, never realized what it meant, never imagined I'd be standing here, trapped between the man who'd rejected me and the man I'd impulsively kissed without knowing who he was. Roland's eyes stayed locked on mine. "This conversation isn't over." "Yes, it is," I said, finding my voice somewhere in the chaos of my thoughts. "It has to be." I pulled away before he could stop me again, before I could do something even more monumentally stupid than I already had. I slipped past him, past the gardens, past the edges of the festival where the lights and music couldn't quite reach. My wolf whimpered in confusion, torn between the urge to run and the strange, inexplicable pull to go back, to return to the man whose touch had felt like coming home. But I couldn't, because men like Roland Ashenblade Alpha Kings with bloodlines that traced back to the first wolves didn't end up with women like me, broken Omegas who couldn't give them heirs or strengthen their line, or fulfill any of the duties a queen would be expected to perform. I was a mistake, a moment of poor judgment, and the sooner I accepted that, the sooner I could go back to surviving in the margins where I belonged. I didn't know that Roland stood in that garden long after I'd gone, his hand still tingling from where he'd touched me, his wolf howling in frustration and recognition. I didn't know that he'd been searching for me for his mate for 3 years, driven by visions and instinct, and a blood moon prophecy that said his destined queen would reveal herself before the year's end. I didn't know that he'd felt the bond snap into place the moment my lips touched his, a connection so strong it had nearly brought him to his knees. I didn't know that the council was pressuring him to choose a suitable mate by the next blood moon just 2 months away, or risk losing the support of the pack alliances that kept the territories unified. And I definitely didn't know that Roland Ashenblade, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, had just decided that council pressure and political convenience could go straight to hell. because he'd found his mate, and he had absolutely no intention of letting her go. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, felt his hand against my cheek, heard his voice saying my name like it meant something, like it was more than just a collection of syllables belonging to a nobody Omega who'd made a spectacular fool of herself. Roland Ashenblade, the Alpha King. I'd kissed the Alpha King. My small apartment felt suffocating, the walls pressing in as I paced from the window to the door and back again. My wolf was restless, agitated in a way I'd never experienced before. She kept pushing against my consciousness, demanding I go back, return to him, find him. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Whatever insanity had possessed me at that festival was done. Over. A humiliating story I'd have to live down for the rest of my miserable life. By the time dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, I'd made a decision. I would leave the lunar court. Maybe not the territory entirely, but I'd find somewhere smaller, quieter, somewhere the gossip wouldn't follow quite so viciously, somewhere I could disappear and rebuild whatever scraps of dignity I had left. I was throwing clothes into a travel bag when the knock came. 3 sharp raps against my door, authoritative and impossible to ignore. My heart lurched. I told myself it was probably nothing. A neighbor, a messenger, anyone but Miss Aveline Thorne? A male voice called through the door. Official. Formal. You are summoned to the palace by order of His Majesty, Alpha King Roland Ashenblade. A carriage waits below. The bag slipped from my hands. No, absolutely not. This couldn't be happening. There must be some mistake. I called back, my voice cracking. I'm nobody. The king wouldn't. There is no mistake, Miss Thorne. You are expected within the hour. I pressed my hand against my mouth, fighting down the panic clawing up my throat. Why would he summon me? To reprimand me for my disrespect? To make an example of the foolish Omega who dared to touch him without permission? Or worse, what if Marcus had said something? Twisted the story somehow to make me look even more pathetic than I already was? My wolf surged forward, surprising me with her eagerness. She wanted to go. Needed to, with an intensity that bordered on desperation. Miss Thorne, shall I tell His Majesty you refuse his summons? The threat was subtle but unmistakable. You didn't refuse an Alpha King. Not unless you wanted to face consequences that would make my current humiliation look like a minor inconvenience. I'll be down in 10 minutes, I managed. I heard footsteps retreating down the hallway, and I slumped against the door, my heart racing. This was it. The final nail in my coffin of mortification. Whatever happened at that palace, I knew my life was about to get infinitely more complicated. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple dove-gray dress that wouldn't draw attention. I pinned my dark hair back, scrubbed my face clean, did everything I could to look presentable and unremarkable. Maybe if I was boring enough, forgettable enough, he'd dismiss me quickly, and I could slink back into obscurity where I belonged. The carriage ride to the palace was torture. The driver said nothing, and I was grateful for the silence even as it gave my mind too much room to spiral. The palace loomed larger as we approached, all white stone and soaring towers, beautiful and imposing in equal measure. I'd never been inside. Common pack members rarely were, unless they held some position of importance or influence, which I decidedly did not. The guards at the entrance barely glanced at me before waving the carriage through. We rolled past manicured gardens and marble fountains, and with every passing second, my anxiety ratcheted higher. By the time we stopped at a side entrance, my hands were shaking. A stern-looking woman in formal palace attire met me at the door. Miss Thorne, follow me. She led me through a maze of corridors, each more opulent than the last. High ceilings, tapestries depicting ancient battles, floors so polished I could see my reflection in them. I felt desperately out of place, like a smudge on an otherwise perfect canvas. We finally stopped outside a set of ornate double doors. The woman knocked once, then pushed them open without waiting for a response. Miss Aveline Thorne, Your Majesty. She stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. My feet moved before my brain could catch up, carrying me into what appeared to be a formal receiving room. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the palace grounds. Ancient weapons hung on the walls between portraits of past rulers. And in the center of it all, standing beside a massive desk carved from dark wood, was Roland. He'd changed from the night before. Now he wore formal attire, black pants, a crisp white shirt, a vest embroidered with the royal crest. His dark hair was pushed back from his face, revealing the full intensity of those silver-threaded eyes. He looked every inch the king, powerful and commanding, and I felt the urge to bow so strongly it was almost painful. So I did. I dropped into the formal curtsy expected when addressing royalty, my eyes fixed on the floor. "Your Majesty," I whispered. "I apologize for my behavior last night. It was inappropriate and disrespectful, and I—" "Stand up." The command snapped through the room, and I obeyed without thinking. When I finally looked up, he was closer. Not quite within reach, but close enough that I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands flexed at his sides like he was restraining himself from something. "Do you feel it?" he asked quietly. I blinked. "Feel what?" "The pull, the connection." He took another step closer, and my breath caught. "Tell me you feel it, Aveline. Tell me I'm not imagining this." My wolf howled in recognition, throwing herself against my ribs. "Yes, yes, yes," she seemed to scream. But I couldn't. I couldn't acknowledge what he was suggesting because it was impossible. Mate bonds didn't work this way. They didn't snap into place with a single kiss. They didn't form between alpha kings and broken omegas who couldn't even fulfill the most basic purpose of their designation. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, and the words tasted bitter. His eyes narrowed. "You're lying. I'm not. I can hear your heartbeat, smell your fear, and something else." He moved closer still, and I stumbled back a step. "You feel it, just like I do, the bond." "That's impossible," I said, shaking my head. "Mate bonds don't just appear out of nowhere. They develop over time, through connection and—" "Not always." His voice was rough now, raw with something that sounded like frustration and wonder tangled together. "Sometimes the moon goddess chooses for us. Sometimes fate doesn't wait for permission or timing or political convenience." My back hit the wall. I hadn't even realized I'd been retreating until there was nowhere left to go. Roland stopped just in front of me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him, could see the gold flecks in those silver eyes. "I've been searching for 3 years," he said, and there was an edge of something almost vulnerable in his tone. "Following visions and prophecies and instinct, attending every gathering, every festival, every god's damned political dinner where eligible omegas parade themselves in front of me like I'm some prize to be won. And then you—" He stopped, jaw working. "You kissed me, and everything I'd been searching for, everything I'd almost given up on finding, it just clicked." "No," I whispered, even as my wolf screamed at me to stop denying it. "You can't. I'm not—" "You're my mate, Aveline." His hand came up to the wall beside my head, not trapping me but close enough that I felt caged by his presence. The moon goddess herself couldn't have made it clearer. "And I will not let you run from this. From us." The door burst open behind us. "Your Majesty, the council has assembled and they're demanding—" Marcus stopped dead, taking in the scene. Me pressed against the wall, Roland standing over me with an intensity that probably looked damning from the outside. "What is she doing here?" The disgust in his voice was a slap. Roland's head turned slowly, and the look he leveled at Marcus could have frozen fire. "That," Roland said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, "is none of your concern. Leave, now." Marcus's eyes darted between us, and I saw the moment comprehension dawned. Saw the shock, then the horror, then something that looked uncomfortably like rage. "You can't be serious," Marcus said. "Her? She's—" I said leave. The command rippled with alpha power, undeniable and absolute. Marcus left, but not before shooting me a look of pure venom, and I stood there, trapped between the wall and an alpha king who seemed determined to upend my entire world, realizing with growing horror that running was no longer an option. Whatever this was, whatever impossible thing was happening, it had already begun, and I had no idea how to stop it. The silence after Marcus left was deafening. Roland hadn't moved. His hand was still braced against the wall beside my head, his body angled toward mine in a way that made the air between us feel charged, electric. I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat, could hear the rush of blood in my ears. My wolf was practically purring, drunk on his proximity, on the raw power that radiated from him like heat. But I wasn't my wolf, and I knew better than to let myself fall into whatever fantasy she was spinning. "You need to let me go," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady even though everything inside me was trembling. "Do I?" He tilted his head slightly, studying me with those impossible eyes. "Because from where I'm standing, you're the one pressed against the wall. You could walk away anytime you wanted." He was right. He wasn't physically restraining me. Wasn't touching me at all, actually. But the weight of his presence, The sheer intensity of his focus, it pinned me in place more effectively than any physical barrier could have. I forced myself to take a breath, to think past the chaos in my head. What do you want from me? Everything. The word was simple, direct, and it sent a shiver down my spine. But I'll settle for a conversation. For now. He pushed off the wall and stepped back, giving me space I desperately needed but didn't entirely want. I hated that contradiction, hated how conflicted he made me feel. He moved to the desk, leaning against it with his arms crossed, every line of his body radiating controlled power. Sit, he said, gesturing to one of the chairs positioned in front of the desk. I'd rather stand. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. Stubborn, cautious, I corrected. There's a difference. Is there? He echoed my words from the garden, and despite everything, I felt a ghost of a smile threaten at the corner of my mouth. I suppressed it immediately. He sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that was startlingly human for someone who carried himself like he was carved from marble. I'm not going to hurt you, Aveline. Despite what you might think, despite what Marcus might have implied, you're not here to be punished or humiliated. You're here because we need to talk about what happens next. Nothing happens next, I said quickly. Last night was a mistake. I didn't know who you were, and you didn't know... I stopped, swallowing hard. You don't know anything about me. If you did, you wouldn't be claiming this bond exists. Try me. The challenge hung between us, and I felt something crack open in my chest. The part of me that had been holding all this shame and pain and humiliation locked away. The part that was so tired of pretending to be strong when I felt like I was barely holding myself together. I can't have children, I said, the words coming out flat and brittle. I'm barren, broken, whatever you want to call it. That's why Marcus rejected me. That's why I'll never be a suitable mate for anyone, let alone an alpha king who needs heirs to secure his line and maintain the alliances that keep the territories from tearing themselves apart. I expected shock, disappointment, maybe even disgust. What I didn't expect was for his expression to soften, for something almost like understanding to flicker across his face. I know, he said quietly. The floor dropped out from under me. You what? I know about your medical condition. I know about Marcus's rejection. I know that the pack whispers about you behind your back and treats you like you're something to be pitied. His jaw tightened. And I know that none of that changes what I felt the moment you kissed me. None of it changes the mate bond. But it should, I said, and I hated how my voice cracked. You need a queen who can give you children, who can be what your people expect. I can't. What I need, he interrupted, his voice taking on an edge, is a mate. What the kingdom needs is stability and unity, yes, but there are ways to achieve that which don't require you to tear yourself apart trying to be something you're not. I stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. I don't understand. He pushed off the desk and moved to the windows, his hands clasped behind his back. For a long moment, he just looked out at the grounds, his profile sharp against the morning light. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled, almost businesslike. The Blood Moon Council has given me an ultimatum. I have until the next blood moon 2 months from now to choose a mate and formalize the bond, or they'll begin proceedings to dissolve the current alliance structure and redistribute power among the pack alphas. He turned to look at me. It's a power play, essentially. They want more control, and they're using my unmated status as leverage. I still don't see what this has to do with me. I'm proposing a solution that benefits us both. He moved closer again, and I fought the urge to step back. A fake courtship. Public enough to satisfy the council and buy me time. Private enough that you maintain your boundaries and your freedom. I blinked. You want me to pretend to be your mate? I want you to be my mate, he corrected. But I understand you need time to accept that. So yes, I'm suggesting we present a courtship to the public. Attend events together. Show enough affection to convince the council and the packs that I've found my queen. In return, I'll protect you from the gossip and the cruelty you've been enduring. I'll give you a place at court, resources, respect. And what do you get out of this? I asked, suspicion creeping into my voice. Besides the obvious political advantage. His eyes locked onto mine, and the intensity there stole my breath. I get time. Time to prove to you that this bond is real. Time to show you that what the pack thinks about your worth has nothing to do with your actual value. Time to convince you that you're exactly what I've been searching for. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. This is insane. Probably, he agreed. But it's also our best option. Unless you'd rather I formally claim you right now and deal with the fallout together? No. The word came out too fast, too panicked. He smiled, and it was almost gentle. Then we do this my way. A courtship. Public affection when necessary. Private boundaries that you set, and I will respect absolutely. You want separate rooms? Done. You want time alone? You'll have it. You want to maintain some semblance of your independence? I won't stop you. Why? I whispered. Why are you doing this? You could have any Omega in the territories. Someone suitable. Someone who… Because you're my mate, he said simply, as if it explained everything. And I don't give up what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have scared me. Instead, it sent warmth flooding through my chest, and I hated myself a little for how much I wanted to believe him. I need conditions, I said, and my voice came out stronger than I felt. If we're doing this, I need rules. That smile widened. There's the negotiation I was waiting for. I'm serious. I crossed my arms, trying to project confidence I absolutely did not possess. First, this is temporary. 2 months to satisfy your counsel, and then we go our separate ways. I'm not signing up for a lifetime of pretending. Agreed. For now. The qualifier hung in the air, but I chose to ignore it. Second, no one can know it's fake. Not Marcus, not your counsel, not anyone. If this falls apart, I don't want everyone knowing I was part of some elaborate scheme. Done. Third, you don't get to interfere with my life outside of public appearances. I keep my apartment, my freedom, my ability to make my own choices. Within reason, he countered. I won't have my mate living in unsafe conditions or putting herself at risk. I've been living there for 2 years just fine, and now you're connected to me. That changes things whether you like it or not. I glared at him, but he didn't budge. Finally, I sighed. Fine, but I maintain some independence. Agreed. And fourth, I hesitated, then forced the words out. No physical intimacy beyond what's necessary for appearances. This isn't, you don't want me touching you. His voice was carefully neutral, but I caught the flash of something that might have been hurt in his eyes. I don't want you touching me and making me believe in something that can't be real, I said, and the honesty of it left me feeling raw and exposed. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Your boundaries will be respected. But Aveline, he stepped closer, and this time I didn't move away. When you're ready, when you finally accept that this is real, that boundary will be the first one to fall, and it will be your choice. I won't push. I won't manipulate. But I also won't pretend I don't want you. The heat in his voice wrapped around me like smoke, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stand there feeling like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. Do we have a deal? He asked. I should have said no. Should have run while I still could. Should have protected myself from the inevitable heartbreak that was coming. Instead, I heard myself say, yes. And just like that, I sealed my fate. The first public appearance came faster than I was ready for. 3 days. That's all the time I had to wrap my head around the insanity I'd agreed to before Roland's personal attendants descended on my apartment like a well-dressed storm. They brought clothes, not just 1 or 2 outfits, but an entire wardrobe of gowns and day dresses and shoes that probably cost more than I'd earned in the last year. They brought jewelry, cosmetics, a schedule typed on cream-colored paper that outlined every event, every appearance, every moment I'd be expected to play the role of a woman falling in love with the Alpha King. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, or scream. I wasn't sure which. The first event was a dinner with the Northern Council, the same group of wolves who'd given Roland his ultimatum. 20 influential pack leaders and their mates, all gathering to assess the king's new choice, to judge whether I was worthy, whether I could be molded into something acceptable. I stood in front of the mirror in the palace suite they'd moved me into despite my protests about keeping my apartment, and barely recognized the woman staring back. The dress was midnight blue, elegant without being ostentatious, and it fit like it had been made for me, because it had. They'd taken my measurements and commissioned a wardrobe in less than 72 hours. My hair had been styled in soft waves that fell over one shoulder, and the makeup was subtle but transformative, highlighting features I usually tried to downplay. I looked like I belonged at court. I looked like a lie. The knock on my door was precise, punctual. I knew it was Roland before I opened it. I could feel him now, an awareness that hummed under my skin like a second heartbeat. It should have been comforting. Instead, it terrified me. He stood in the hallway wearing formal attire, all sharp lines and controlled power. But when his eyes landed on me, something shifted in his expression, softened. His gaze traveled from my face down to the dress and back up, slow and deliberate, and heat pooled in my stomach despite my best efforts to remain unaffected. "You look," he stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "Beautiful doesn't cover it." "It's the dress," I said, smoothing my hands over the fabric nervously. "And the hair, and probably the makeup. It's all armor, really." "No." He stepped into the room, and I caught his scent pine and smoke, and that wild, untamed something that made my wolf stir. "The dress is just wrapping. You're what makes it worth looking at." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I said nothing. Just clasped my hands together to keep them from shaking and tried to remember how to breathe normally. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No." The honesty escaped before I could stop it. "I'm absolutely terrified." Something flickered across his face. Concern, maybe, or understanding. He held out his hand, palm up, an offering rather than a demand. "Then we'll be terrified together. But Aveline, they're going to love you, because I do." The words hung between us, casual and devastating. He'd said it so easily, like it was a fact rather than a declaration. And maybe for him it was. Maybe the mate bond made everything simple and clear and certain. But for me, it was a minefield I was navigating blindfolded. I took his hand because refusing would make this harder, and his fingers closed around mine with a gentleness that contradicted the strength I could feel coiled beneath his skin. The dinner was exactly as awful as I'd anticipated. We sat at the head of a long table in a dining hall that gleamed with crystal and silver. The council members and their mates watched me with varying degrees of curiosity, skepticism, and outright hostility. I recognized a few faces from the festival, including a woman who'd been one of the ones whispering about me after Marcus's rejection. Her expression now was pure calculation, like she was trying to figure out what game I was playing. Roland kept his hand on mine throughout the meal, his thumb occasionally brushing over my knuckles in a gesture that was probably meant to be reassuring. Instead, it made me hyper-aware of every point of contact between us, every casual touch that felt anything but casual. "So, Miss Thorne," one of the council members said, a silver-haired alpha named Garrett who looked like he'd been carved from stone. "Tell us about yourself, your family, your accomplishments." The emphasis on that last word was deliberate. He wanted me to stumble, to reveal exactly how ordinary and unsuitable I was. "I'm from the Lunar Court Pack," I said, keeping my voice steady. "My parents passed when I was young. I was raised by the pack, primarily by the elder Omegas who taught me, I almost said how to be a good mate, but caught myself, how to support the community. I've worked in the pack nursery, helped organize community events, and volunteered with the healers when they needed extra hands." It sounded pathetic even to my own ears. No special skills, no notable lineage, nothing that would justify an Alpha King's interest. "Fascinating," Garrett said in a tone that suggested it was anything but. "And your medical history is private?" Roland interrupted, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "And not up for discussion at a dinner table, or anywhere else for that matter." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Garrett's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Of course, Your Majesty. I meant no offense. See that you don't." Roland's hand squeezed mine, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of careful conversation and measuring looks. By the time dessert was served, my face hurt from maintaining a pleasant expression, and my wolf was pacing restlessly, agitated by the undercurrent of judgment and hostility. Finally, mercifully, it ended. The council members dispersed with polite but distant farewells, and Roland led me out of the dining hall and into a quieter corridor. The moment we were alone, I pulled my hand from his and pressed my palms against my eyes. "That was a disaster," I said. "That was politics." His voice was closer than I expected, and when I lowered my hands, he was right there, his expression unreadable. "You did well." I barely said anything. "You held your ground. You didn't let them intimidate you, and when Garrett pushed too far, you didn't crumble." He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "That takes strength. More than they have, certainly." "They hate me," I whispered. "They think I'm using you, or that you've lost your mind, or both. Let them think what they want." His hand lingered near my face, and I felt the warmth of it like a brand. "Their opinions don't change what's real." "And what's real?" I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "This." His hand moved to rest over my heart, and I felt my pulse jump beneath his palm. The fact that being near you calmed something in me I didn't even know was restless. The fact that when you walked out of that room 3 days ago, I felt it like a physical loss. The fact that I've been searching for you my entire adult life and didn't even know it until you kissed me in a garden. I should have stepped back, should have reminded him of the boundaries we'd agreed on. But I couldn't move, couldn't think past the way he was looking at me like I was something precious and irreplaceable. "Roland, I'm not asking you to say it back," he said quietly. "I'm not asking you to feel what I feel. Not yet. I'm just asking you to stop running long enough to see what's right in front of you." Before I could respond, footsteps echoed down the corridor. We stepped apart just as Marcus rounded the corner, his expression darkening when he saw us. "Your Majesty," he said, his tone clipped. "The council would like a word. Privately." Roland's jaw tightened. "Tonight?" They were insistent. I could read between those lines. They wanted to discuss me, to voice their concerns, to pressure him into reconsidering. "Go," I said, finding my voice. "I'll be fine." Roland looked at me for a long moment, conflict clear in his eyes. Then he nodded. "I'll have someone escort you back to your suite. I know the way." "Aveline, I'm not helpless," I said, more sharply than I intended. "I can walk through a palace without an escort." Something that might have been pride flickered across his face. "No, you're definitely not helpless." He left with Marcus, and I stood alone in that corridor, my heart still racing from his touch, his words, the impossible weight of everything he was offering. I made it halfway back to my suite before the tears started, not because of the council's hostility or Marcus's obvious disdain, but because for the first time in longer than I could remember, someone had looked at me and seen something other than what I lacked. Roland saw me, not my medical condition, not my failed bond with Marcus, not the whispers and the shame and the crushing weight of pack expectations. Just me, and God's help me, I was starting to believe he might be right, that this might be real, that I might be falling for a man I'd only kissed once, in a moment of reckless desperation, without having any idea it would change absolutely everything. My wolf settled in my chest, content for the first time in years, and I realized with dawning horror that my carefully constructed walls were already starting to crumble. I didn't make it to my suite. Halfway down the corridor, a voice stopped me cold. Well, the infamous Aveline Thorne. I turned to find a man leaning against one of the marble pillars, arms crossed, watching me with an expression that was equal parts amusement and contempt. He was handsome in a sharp, dangerous way. Dark hair swept back from a face that shared Roland's strong bone structure but lacked the warmth. His eyes were ice blue instead of silver-threaded gray, and they tracked over me like I was something he was considering purchasing and finding wanting. "I don't believe we've met," I said carefully, my wolf bristling with sudden wariness. "No, we haven't. Roland's been keeping you quite close, hasn't he?" He pushed off the pillar and moved toward me with the predatory grace of an alpha used to getting what he wanted. "Damien Ashenblade, the king's cousin, though I suppose that makes me significantly less important now that he's found his." He paused, letting his gaze rake over me again. "Mate." The way he said it made the word sound like an insult. "It's late," I said, stepping back. "I should run away?" "Yes, I've heard that's your specialty." His smile was all edges. "First from Marcus, now from honest conversation. Do you ever stand still long enough to face consequences?" Heat flooded my cheeks. "I don't know what you think you know about me, but I know everything about you, Miss Thorne." He moved closer, and I fought the urge to retreat further. Showing fear would only encourage him. "Your medical condition, your rejection, the fact that you're spectacularly unsuited to be anyone's mate, let alone a king's. The whole court is buzzing with it. Some find it romantic, the Alpha King choosing love over duty. Others find it," he tilted his head, "concerning." "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat. "The same thing everyone wants. What's best for the kingdom?" He circled me slowly, and I forced myself to stay still. "Roland is a good king. Strong, fair, but he's always had one weakness: he leads with his heart instead of his head. And this?" He gestured vaguely at me. "This is proof of that. No offense. Plenty taken." He laughed, and the sound had no warmth in it. "I like you. You've got spine at least. More than I expected from someone in your position. But spine doesn't change facts. And the fact is, Roland needs a queen who can produce heirs, who can cement alliances through bloodline, Who can be what the kingdom requires? Not. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, expensive and cloying. Whatever this is, my wolf snarled in my mind, and I felt my hands curl into fists at my sides. The king made his choice. Did he? Or did you manipulate a moment of weakness into something more? His voice dropped, taking on a conspiratorial tone. I've been watching you, Aveline. The way you look at him when you think no one's paying attention. Like you can't believe your luck. Like you know this is temporary, and you're trying to squeeze every drop of benefit out of it before it ends. You don't know anything about me. I know ambition when I see it. He leaned in, and I could see the calculation in his eyes. I know opportunism, and I know that Roland is too blinded by whatever magic you worked on him to see what's right in front of his face. A Baron Omega who can't give him what he needs, playing at being queen while the kingdom suffers for it. The word Baron hit like a physical blow, and I felt something crack inside me. All the shame and pain and humiliation I'd been trying to bury came rushing back, sharp and vicious. Because he was right, wasn't he? I couldn't give Roland children, couldn't secure his bloodline, couldn't be what a queen was supposed to be. I was exactly what Damien said, an opportunist in over my head, pretending to be something I could never actually become. Nothing to say? Damien smiled, reading my silence as victory. That's what I thought. Look, I'm not without sympathy. You've had a hard life. Marcus's rejection was cruel, even if it was necessary, and I'm sure Roland's attention feels good after being discarded. But you need to understand something. His hand shot out and gripped my arm, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to make his point. This kingdom cannot afford a weak queen, and you, Miss Thorne, are the definition of weakness. I should have stayed quiet, should have extracted myself and walked away with whatever dignity I had left. But something in me, some part that had been beaten down and suppressed for too long, finally snapped. Let go. My voice came out low and deadly, and my wolf surged forward, lending me strength I didn't know I had. Damien's eyebrows rose, but he didn't release me. Or what? You'll what exactly? Run to Roland and tell him I was mean to you? That'll really prove your queen material. I said let go. Power rippled through my voice. Omega power that was supposed to be soft and yielding but came out hard as steel. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Damien's face. He released my arm and stepped back, and I saw him reassessing me, recalculating. You're stronger than you look, he said slowly. I'll give you that. But strength without purpose is just noise. And you, Aveline? You're all noise and no substance. When Roland finally sees that, and he will, I'll be here to pick up the pieces, to guide him toward a more suitable match. Someone who can actually fulfill the role of queen. Someone like who? I asked, even though I already knew. His smile was sharp as broken glass. There are several worthy candidates. My sister Seraphine, for instance. Excellent bloodline, proven fertility, already has connections with 3 major packs. She'd be perfect. Then why didn't he choose her 3 years ago when he started looking? The question hit its mark. Damien's jaw tightened. Because he wasn't desperate then. He had time. Now the Blood Moon Council is breathing down his neck, and instead of making a smart choice, he's chasing a bond that shouldn't exist with a woman who can't give him what he needs. The bond is real, I said, and even as I said it, I realized I believed it. When had that happened? When had I stopped questioning and started accepting? Maybe. Maybe not. Bonds can be manufactured, enhanced, manipulated by those who know how. He took a step closer again, his voice dropping. And even if it's real, it doesn't matter. Real bonds have been severed before when circumstances demanded it. When the good of the kingdom outweighed personal desire, Roland knows this. He's just choosing to ignore it because he's infatuated with the idea of finding his fated mate. You're wrong. Am I? He cocked his head. Then prove it. Stay. Try to be what he needs. Watch him realize, day by day, that you're not enough. Watch the council turn on him. Watch the alliances crumble. Watch the kingdom suffer because of your selfishness. He leaned in close enough that I could feel his breath against my ear. Or do the noble thing. Walk away now. Save him from having to choose between you and his crown. Because that choice is coming, Aveline. And when it does, we both know which one he'll pick. Kings don't abdicate for Baron Omegas. They just don't. He stepped back, straightening his jacket like we'd just had a pleasant conversation, instead of him verbally eviscerating me in a palace corridor. Think about it, he said pleasantly. And when you're ready to do the right thing, come find me. I'll make sure your exit is handled discreetly. Maybe even set you up somewhere comfortable. Consider it compensation for your services." He walked away, his footsteps echoing down the marble hall, leaving me standing there with my heart racing and my mind spiraling. Because as much as I hated him, as much as his words had been designed to wound and manipulate, there was truth buried in the poison. I couldn't give Roland children. The council did hate me. The kingdom would suffer if he chose me over political necessity. And eventually, when the initial intensity of the bond faded and reality set in, he would realize what everyone else already knew, that I wasn't worth the cost. My wolf whined in protest, rejecting every word Damien had said. But the human part of me, the part that had survived rejection and shame and loss, knew better than to trust in fairy tales. I made it to my suite on autopilot, locked the door behind me, and finally let myself crumble. I slid down the wall, pulled my knees to my chest, and let the tears come hot and bitter and full of all the grief I'd been holding back, for the mate I'd lost, for the future I couldn't have, for the impossible choice I was going to have to make. Because Damien was right about one thing. Eventually, I would have to walk away, before Roland was forced to choose between me and everything he'd built. Before I destroyed the one good thing that had happened to me in years by holding on to it too tightly. I just didn't know how I was going to survive it. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor of that too-perfect suite, crying into my knees like a broken thing. Long enough that my tears dried into salt tracks on my cheeks. Long enough that my legs went numb. Long enough that when the knock came at my door, soft and hesitant, I'd convinced myself that leaving was the only option left. "Aveline," Roland's voice filtered through the wood, rough with concern. "I know you're in there. I can feel—" He stopped. "Please, let me in." I should have told him to go away. Should have pulled myself together and faced him with whatever scraps of dignity I had left. Instead, I just sat there, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything but exist in the wreckage of Damien's words. The door opened anyway. Of course it did. He was the king. There were no locks that could keep him out if he truly wanted in. He stood in the doorway for a heartbeat, taking in the sight of me, makeup smeared, dress wrinkled, sitting on the floor like I'd forgotten how furniture worked. Then he was moving, crossing the room in 3 long strides and dropping to his knees beside me. "Who did this?" His voice was deadly calm, the kind of calm that came before violence. "Who hurt you?" "No one hurt me," I said, and my voice came out hoarse from crying. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're—" His hands hovered near me, like he wanted to touch but wasn't sure if he was allowed. "Aveline, please, talk to me." "Why?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "So you can tell me everything's going to be okay? So you can promise me this will work out when we both know it won't?" His jaw tightened. "What happened after I left?" I could have lied, should have lied, but I was so tired of pretending, so exhausted from holding everything together, that the truth just spilled out. "I met your cousin." Understanding flashed across his face, followed immediately by fury. "Damien. He was very informative." I laughed, and it sounded brittle even to my own ears. "About how unsuitable I am, how the kingdom needs a real queen, how you're going to have to choose between me and your crown eventually, and we both know which one you'll pick. That's not— It's true though, isn't it?" I finally looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something break all over again, because he was looking at me like I was the only thing that mattered, like the world could burn and he wouldn't care as long as I was okay. And that terrified me more than anything Damien had said. "You need heirs, Roland. The kingdom needs stability. I can't give you either of those things. I'm a political liability wrapped in a biological impossibility, and the longer this goes on, the worse it's going to get." "Stop," the command in his voice made me flinch. "Stop tearing yourself apart for things you can't control." "But I can control this." I pushed myself up from the floor, putting distance between us because I couldn't think when he was too close. "I can walk away. End this before it gets worse. Let you find someone who can actually be what you need." He stood slowly, and I watched emotions war across his face, anger, hurt, frustration, and something else I couldn't name. "Is that what you want?" "It doesn't matter what I want. It's the only thing that matters." He moved toward me, and I backed up until I hit the wall, trapped again, but this time it felt different, desperate instead of threatening. "Tell me you don't feel this bond. Tell me you don't feel the pull between us getting stronger every day. Tell me I'm imagining the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching." "Feelings aren't enough," I whispered. Not when the cost is your kingdom. Then the kingdom can burn." The words were fierce, absolute, and they stole the air from my lungs. I've spent my entire life doing what was expected of me, being the perfect heir, the perfect king, following every rule and tradition and expectation. And for what? To end up alone? To mate with someone suitable and spend the rest of my life wondering what if? He was close enough now that I could feel the heat radiating off him. "I found you, Aveline. After 3 years of searching, after almost giving up, I found you. And I am not letting you go because my cousin is a manipulative bastard, or because the council is too short-sighted to see past outdated traditions. But the heirs, there are other ways." He cupped my face in his hands, gentle despite the intensity radiating from him. "Adoption. Surrogacy. Designating a successor from another bloodline. The law is flexible if you know how to work it. And I'm the king. I don't just follow the law, I shape it. The council will never accept. The council will accept what I tell them to accept." His thumb brushed away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "Do you know what the blood moon prophecy actually said? The one that started this whole search?" I shook my head. "It said I would find my mate before the year's end, and that she would be unexpected. That she would challenge everything I thought I knew about strength and worth. That loving her would require me to choose between tradition and truth." His eyes locked onto mine. I thought it was talking about politics, about having to fight the council to claim whoever the moon goddess chose. But it wasn't. It was talking about this. About you believing you're not enough when you're everything. "I can't give you children," I said again, because it was the only truth I had left to hide behind. "I don't care. You will. Eventually. When the reality sets in and you realize what you've given up." "What I've given up?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Aveline, before you, I had a crown and a title and an entire kingdom full of people who respected me but didn't know me. I had duty and responsibility and absolutely nothing that made any of it worthwhile. You think I'm giving something up by choosing you? I'm finally choosing something for myself, something real, something worth fighting for. But your legacy? My legacy will be that I was a king who valued people over politics, who chose love over convenience, who changed the rules instead of letting them destroy something precious." His forehead dropped to rest against mine. "Let me choose you, Aveline. Let me prove that you're worth more than what the world told you should be." I wanted to believe him. Gods, I wanted it so badly it physically hurt. But Damien's words kept echoing in my head, poisonous and persistent. And underneath them was every rejection, every whisper, every moment I'd been made to feel less than. "What if they're right?" I whispered. "What if I destroy everything you've built? Then we'll build something new." His hands slid down to my shoulders, steadying me. "Together. But Aveline, you need to decide. Are you going to let fear and other people's opinions dictate your life? Or are you going to take a chance on something that might actually make you happy?" "I don't know how," I admitted, and the vulnerability in my own voice made me want to hide. "I don't know how to believe I deserve this, that I deserve you. Then let me believe it for both of us." He pulled back just enough to look into my eyes. "Until you can see what I see, until you understand that the moon goddess doesn't make mistakes, that this bond, this connection, it's not random, it's not a political inconvenience or a biological tragedy. It's fate, and I, for one, am done fighting it." Something in his words cracked through the wall I'd been building. Maybe it was the certainty in his voice. Maybe it was the way he looked at me like I was something sacred. Maybe it was just that I was so tired of fighting, of protecting myself, of being alone in my pain. "The council met tonight," he continued, his voice gentler now. "They presented their concerns, their suggestions for more suitable matches. They threatened to withdraw support if I didn't reconsider." My heart sank. "What did you tell them?" "I told them they could take their suggestions and their threats and shove them straight into the abyss." A fierce smile crossed his face. "I told them I had found my mate, that the bond was real and recognized by the moon goddess herself, and that any attempt to interfere would be considered an act of treason against the crown." I stared at him. "You didn't." "I absolutely did. And then I told them that if they couldn't support their king's choice, they were welcome to tender their resignations, and I'd find council members who understood that strength comes in many forms, not just the ability to produce heirs. Roland, you can't just—" "I can. I did. And I'd do it again." He squeezed my shoulders. "Because you're not a political liability, Aveline. You're my mate. And I will burn every bridge, break every alliance, and dismantle every tradition that tries to take you from me." The intensity in his words should have scared me. Instead, they kindled something warm and dangerous in my chest. Hope. The cruelest and most persistent emotion of all. "What if I can't do this?" I asked. "What if I'm not strong enough to be what you need?" "You already are." He pressed a kiss to my forehead, achingly gentle. "You survived rejection, humiliation, loss. You walked into that dinner tonight knowing they'd judge you, knowing they'd find you wanting, and you held your head high anyway. You think that's not strength? You think I need anything more than that?" "I'm terrified," I whispered. "Good. So am I." His arms came around me, pulling me close, and I let myself sink into the embrace. Let myself feel, just for a moment, what it might be like to stop fighting. Being terrified means it matters. Means it's real. And Aveline? This is the most real thing I've ever felt. I buried my face in his chest, breathing in his scent, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath my cheek. My wolf was practically singing, content in a way she'd never been before, and the human part of me, the part that had been so certain I had to leave, was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could stay. "I'm not leaving," I said finally, the words muffled against his shirt. "But I'm not promising this is forever either. I'm staying for now. For the 2 months we agreed on, and then, we'll see." "I'll take it." He pulled back just enough to tilt my chin up. 2 months to prove to you that this is real, that you're exactly where you belong. That sounds like plenty of time." The confidence in his voice made me want to laugh and cry in equal measure. But as I stood there in his arms, feeling safer than I had in years, I couldn't shake one nagging thought. Damien hadn't been trying to help me tonight. He'd been trying to drive a wedge between Roland and me, which meant he had something to gain from our separation, which meant this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next 3 weeks passed in a strange blur of public appearances and private moments that felt increasingly less like pretending and more like something I didn't have words for yet. Roland kept his promise. He didn't push, didn't demand more than I was willing to give. But he was always there, a steady presence at formal dinners, a warm hand at the small of my back during dances, a voice in the dark when nightmares about rejection and inadequacy pulled me from sleep. He was patient in a way that should have been comforting, but instead made me feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, because good things didn't last. Not for women like me. The blood moon was 3 days away when everything started to unravel. I noticed the whispers first. Servants who stopped talking when I entered a room. Council members who exchanged meaningful glances during meetings. Even the palace guards seemed tense, watchful in a way that set my nerves on edge. "Something's wrong," I told Roland one evening as we walked through the palace gardens. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson, and under different circumstances, it might have been romantic. Instead, it felt ominous. "I know," he said, his jaw tight. "I've had reports. Damien's been meeting with certain council members, privately, without my knowledge or permission." My stomach dropped. "What kind of meetings?" "The kind where they discuss whether a king who refuses to prioritize the kingdom's needs over his personal desires is fit to rule." His hand found mine, squeezing gently. "He's building support for a challenge, waiting for the blood moon." "A challenge?" The word felt wrong in my mouth, too big and too terrible. "An old law, rarely invoked but technically still valid." Roland's voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the anger underneath. "If a member of the royal bloodline can prove the reigning monarch is unfit through madness, incompetence, or actions that endanger the kingdom, they can issue a formal challenge. The council votes. If the challenge succeeds, the king is removed, and the challenger takes the crown." I stopped walking. "He's going to try to take your crown." "He's going to try." Roland turned to face me, and in the dying light his eyes looked almost feral. But trying and succeeding are two very different things. "What's his proof?" I asked, even though I already knew. "What's he going to claim makes you unfit?" Roland's silence was answer enough. Me. I was the proof. The Baron Omega who couldn't produce heirs. The political liability he'd chosen over suitable matches. The weakness Damien would weaponize to tear down everything Roland had built. "We should end this," I said quietly. "The fake courtship. We should announce it was a political strategy that's run its course, and you should—" "No." The word was absolute. "We're not doing this again, Aveline. We're not letting Damien manipulate you into running." "I'm not running. I'm being practical. If he has no ammunition, he'll find something else. That's what men like Damien do. They find weaknesses and exploit them until they get what they want. His hands came up to frame my face. But you're not a weakness. You're the only thing making this crown worth wearing. Before I could respond, before I could argue or protest or do anything reasonable, his lips were on mine. It wasn't like the first kiss in the garden, desperate and reckless and fueled by champagne and poor decisions. This was deliberate, claiming. A kiss that tasted like possession and promise, and something deeper that made my wolf howl with recognition. I should have pulled away. Should have reminded him of boundaries and agreements, and all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Instead, I kissed him back, my hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and I felt the low growl that rumbled through his chest. His arms came around me, one hand sliding into my hair, and the kiss deepened into something that felt less like affection and more like a vow. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against mine. "I'm not losing you," he said, his voice rough. "Not to Damien, not to the council, not to your own fears. Whatever he's planning, we face it together." I wanted to believe him. But as we stood there in the garden with darkness closing in around us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. The blood moon ceremony was held in the grand hall, a massive space, with vaulted ceilings and walls lined with the banners of every major pack in the territories. Hundreds of wolves packed the room, all dressed in formal attire, all watching with varying degrees of curiosity and calculation. I stood beside Roland on the dais, wearing a gown the color of midnight that had been delivered to my suite that morning, along with a note in his handwriting, "For my queen, whether the council likes it or not." The ceremony itself was ancient, ritualistic. The Alpha King was required to present himself before the assembled packs during the blood moon, to reaffirm his commitment to the territories and accept the pledges of loyalty from the council members. It should have been routine, boring even, but I could feel the tension in the room like a living thing, could see the way certain council members kept glancing at Damien where he stood near the front of the crowd, his expression carefully neutral. The pledges went smoothly at first. One by one, council members approached the dais, knelt, and spoke the traditional words of loyalty. Roland accepted each pledge with the appropriate formality, his face an unreadable mask. But when Damien's turn came, he didn't kneel. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying through the sudden silence. "I cannot, in good conscience, pledge my loyalty to a king who has shown himself unfit to rule." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Roland's hand found mine, squeezing once in warning or reassurance, I couldn't tell which. "That's a serious accusation, cousin," Roland said, his voice deadly calm. "I assume you have evidence to support it?" "I do." Damien pulled a rolled parchment from his jacket and held it up. "Signed testimonies from multiple pack healers, confirming that your chosen mate is medically incapable of producing heirs. Letters from allied packs expressing concern about the stability of succession. Documentation of council meetings where your decisions were questioned, and you responded with threats of removal rather than rational discussion." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You've allowed personal attachment to cloud your judgment, Your Majesty. You've prioritized your own desires over the kingdom's needs. And according to the old laws, that constitutes grounds for challenge." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. Every eye in the room had turned to me, and I felt the weight of their judgment like a physical thing. Roland's hand tightened on mine. "Are you formally issuing a challenge?" "I am." Damien's smile was sharp. "Unless, of course, you'd like to abdicate peacefully. Save us all the unpleasantness of a trial." "There won't be a trial," Roland said, and something in his tone made everyone go still. "Because unlike you, cousin, I actually investigated before making public accusations." He gestured, and the doors at the back of the hall opened. 2 palace guards entered, escorting a woman I didn't recognize, middle-aged, nervous, wearing the simple robes of a pack healer. "This is Healer Morgana," Roland announced. "One of the healers whose testimony Damien claims to have obtained. Healer Morgana, would you please tell the assembly what you told me 3 days ago?" The healer's voice shook slightly, but she spoke clearly. "I was approached by Lord Damien 6 weeks ago. He asked me to sign a document stating that I had examined Miss Thorne and confirmed her inability to bear children. But I've never examined Miss Thorne. I've never even met her. When I refused, he threatened my family, my son's position at court, my daughter's engagement. He said if I didn't sign, he'd make sure we lost everything." The murmurs grew louder. Damien's expression flickered just for a moment before settling back into neutral confidence. "She's lying," he said smoothly. "Obviously coerced by... Then perhaps you can explain this." Roland produced his own parchment, unrolling it for the assembly to see. "Financial records showing large payments from your personal accounts to various council members over the past 2 months. Payments that coincidentally correspond with their sudden shift in support from neutral to actively undermining my authority." Damien's face went pale, then flushed with rage. "Those payments were legitimate business transactions. To council members?" Roland's voice cut through the room like a blade. "For what services exactly? Because according to these records, the amounts are substantial. Too substantial to be explained away as consulting fees or diplomatic gifts." More guards entered, carrying boxes of documents. Roland gestured to them. Letters between Damien and certain council members discussing strategies to undermine my authority. Plans to spread rumors about my mate's unsuitability. Even discussions about what would happen after the transition of power. His eyes locked onto Damien. "You've been planning a coup, cousin. Using fabricated medical evidence and bribery to turn the council against me. The only question is why." "Because you're weak," Damien spat, his composure finally cracking. "Because you'd rather play at romance with a broken Omega than secure the kingdom's future. Because you're so desperate to believe in fairy tales and fate that you can't see you're destroying everything our family built." "No," Roland's voice dropped to something dangerous. "You wanted the crown for yourself. You've always wanted it. And when I started searching for my mate 3 years ago, you saw an opportunity. If I couldn't find her before the council's deadline, they'd pressure me to choose someone suitable, probably your sister, conveniently. But when I found Aveline, when I claimed a mate who didn't fit your narrative of what a queen should be, you had to act. Had to find a way to delegitimize my choice and position yourself as the rational alternative." The silence in the room was absolute. Every wolf present was watching, waiting to see how this would resolve. "The evidence is clear," Roland continued, addressing the full assembly now. "Damien Ashenblade has attempted to undermine the throne through deception, bribery, and fabricated testimony. Under the old laws he invoked, that constitutes treason, the punishment for which is death or exile." Damien lunged forward, his wolf surging to the surface. But the guards were faster. They had him restrained before he could shift. Silver chains wrapping around his wrists and throat, painful for a wolf but not lethal. "You can't do this," Damien snarled. "The council won't stand for..." "The council," Roland interrupted, "will do exactly what they're supposed to do: support their lawful king. Any member who accepted bribes or participated in this conspiracy will have the opportunity to step down with their dignity intact, or they can join you in exile. Their choice." I watched several council members go pale. One by one, 3 of them stood and removed their ceremonial sashes, placing them on their seats before walking out with their heads down. Resignation in action. Roland turned to the remaining council members. "Does anyone else wish to contest my authority? Question my fitness to rule? Now would be the time." The head council member, Elder Garrett, the same man who'd questioned me at that first dinner, rose slowly. For a heartbeat, I thought he was going to challenge. Instead, he bowed. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying through the hall, "I believe I speak for the remaining council when I say we have been short-sighted. We allowed tradition and personal bias to cloud our judgment, and in doing so, we nearly allowed a traitor to tear apart what you've built." He straightened. "We pledge our loyalty and our apologies." One by one, the other council members stood and bowed. Even Marcus, standing near the back, lowered his head in acknowledgement. Roland accepted their pledges with a single nod, then turned to Damien. "You'll be escorted to the border tonight. You're stripped of your title, your lands, and your place in the Ashenblade line. If you're found within these territories after dawn, the sentence will be death. Do you understand?" Damien's eyes burned with hatred, but he didn't respond. The guards dragged him from the hall and I watched him go, feeling nothing but relief that he was finally gone. When the doors closed behind him, Roland turned back to the assembly. "Now, since we're addressing uncomfortable truths tonight, let's discuss the real issue. Not my mate's suitability, but the outdated laws that made her a target in the first place." He gestured for me to step forward. I did, even though my legs felt like water and every instinct screamed at me to run. "Aveline Thorne is my mate," Roland said, and his voice carried absolute certainty. "Recognized by the moon goddess through a bond so strong it nearly brought me to my knees the moment it formed. But she's been made to feel inadequate, broken and worthless because of medical circumstances beyond her control. And that, more than anything Damien attempted tonight, is what threatens our kingdom. He turned to face me, and the tenderness in his expression made my chest ache. We've built a society that measures worth by fertility, that treats omegas as vessels for children rather than individuals with value beyond their ability to reproduce. And in doing so, we've created a culture of shame that drives good people away and rewards those who manipulate that shame for power. He looked back at the assembly. That changes. Tonight, I'm proposing a reformation of succession law. Heirs can be designated through bloodline or adoption. Queens will be judged by their strength, intelligence, and dedication to the kingdom, not their medical records. And any omega who faces rejection or discrimination based on fertility will have legal recourse and protection. The hall erupted in murmurs, some approving, others uncertain. But Roland wasn't finished. As for the question of my heirs, he pulled another document from inside his jacket. I had Aveline examined by 3 separate healers over the past 2 weeks, with her permission and full knowledge. My head snapped toward him. He hadn't told me about this, hadn't prepared me for. The diagnosis of infertility she received from Marcus's pack healer 5 years ago was incomplete, Roland continued. Based on a single examination and outdated testing methods, the current healer's assessment is more nuanced. Aveline has a condition that makes natural conception difficult but not impossible. With proper treatment and care, pregnancy is achievable. Not guaranteed, but possible. The world tilted. Possible. Not broken. Not barren. Not a lost cause. Possible. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, and I fought to keep them from falling. Roland's hand found mine again, anchoring me. But even if the healers had confirmed the original diagnosis, he said, his voice softening, it wouldn't matter, because I didn't choose Aveline for her ability to produce heirs. I chose her because she's brilliant and brave and strong enough to survive things that would have broken lesser wolves. I chose her because being near her makes me want to be better. Because she challenges me and grounds me and makes me remember that being king isn't just about power, it's about protecting the people who can't protect themselves. He turned to face the assembly fully, still holding my hand. A throne without love is already empty. I learned that in 3 years of searching for something I couldn't name, and I refused to let outdated traditions or political pressure take away the one thing that makes this crown worth wearing. The silence that followed his words was different from before, softer, contemplative. Elder Garrett was the first to speak. Your Majesty, if I may. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I have been on this council for 40 years. I've served 3 kings, including your father. And in all that time, I've never heard a monarch speak with such conviction about matters of the heart. We've always prioritized politics over personal connection, strategy over sentiment. And perhaps, he glanced at the empty seats where the resigned council members had sat. Perhaps that's led us astray more than we realized. He bowed deeply. I support your reforms, and I offer my formal apology to Miss Thorne for the treatment she's received. She didn't deserve our judgment. One by one, the other council members echoed his words, some more sincere than others, but all bending to the new reality that had just been established. Roland addressed them all. The reforms will be drafted and presented for formal approval within the week. Any council member who cannot support them is welcome to resign, but if you stay, you will enforce them. Completely. Am I understood? A chorus of, "Yes, Your Majesty," filled the hall. Roland turned to me, and the formal mask he'd been wearing for the assembly finally cracked. I saw the exhaustion underneath, the strain of holding everything together, the fierce protectiveness that had driven every word he'd spoken. Are you okay? He asked quietly, meant only for me. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Because I wasn't just okay. I was something else entirely, something I couldn't name yet but felt like the first breath after drowning. Then let's finish this. He turned back to the assembly one last time. The blood moon ceremony will conclude with the traditional pledges. But tonight, I'm adding something new. A vow. His hand tightened on mine. I, Roland Ashenblade, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, vow to protect and cherish my mate, Aveline Thorne. To value her worth beyond what tradition dictates. To build a kingdom where strength is measured not by bloodline or biology, but by courage, compassion, and the will to stand against injustice. His eyes locked onto mine, and the intensity there stole my breath. And I vow to spend every day proving to her that she is enough, exactly as she is. The words settled over me like a benediction, and I felt something inside me finally, truly break. Not in a painful way, but like a wall crumbling, letting light flood into spaces that had been dark for too long. I stepped closer, rose onto my toes, and kissed him in front of the entire assembly. It wasn't dignified or proper or politically strategic. It was real. And when he kissed me back, wrapping his arms around me like I was the only thing that mattered, I heard the assembly erupt in applause. For the first time in years, I wasn't ashamed. I was home. 6 months later, we stood at the same festival where everything had begun. The Harvest Moon Festival had returned with its lanterns and music and masked dancers spinning across marble floors. But this time, I wasn't standing on the edges watching my life fall apart. This time, I was in the center of it all. Roland's hand warm and solid in mine, wearing a gown that marked me as exactly what I'd never thought I could be. Queen. The title still felt foreign sometimes, like a coat that didn't quite fit. But Roland had been patient, helping me grow into it day by day, teaching me the political dances, the careful negotiations, the way to hold power without letting it consume you. And I'd surprised both of us by being good at it, at seeing the patterns others missed, at connecting with the omegas and lower-ranking wolves who'd felt invisible for too long. The reforms had passed, though not without resistance. 3 more council members had resigned, rather than support laws that undermined tradition. But new members had been appointed younger, more progressive, willing to consider that strength came in forms beyond bloodline and biology. The adoption law had been the most controversial, but it was also the most necessary. Already, 2 packs had successfully designated heirs through adoption, and the sky hadn't fallen. Progress was slow, but it was progress. "You're thinking too hard," Roland murmured against my ear, pulling me closer as we moved through the dance. "I can practically hear the gears turning." "Just remembering," I said, letting myself relax into his lead. "Last time I was here, I was convinced my life was over. And now? Now I'm terrified I'm going to wake up and discover this was all a very elaborate dream." I looked up at him, at the face that had become as familiar as my own reflection. "You're too good to be real." He laughed, the sound rich and warm. "You've clearly forgotten about last week when I spent 3 hours arguing with Elder Garrett about grain distribution and nearly threw my crown at his head. That was political passion. Very kingly. That was me being a stubborn ass who doesn't like admitting when someone else has a valid point." His hand tightened on my waist. "You're the one who talked me down, reminded me that compromise isn't weakness. You're the good one in this relationship, Aveline. I'm just the guy who got lucky enough to kiss you first. Technically, I kissed you. Best decision you ever made." I couldn't argue with that, because despite everything, the council battles, the lingering whispers, the adjustment to palace life, I'd never been happier. Never felt more seen, more valued, more fundamentally myself than I did standing beside him. The healers had been right about the treatment. 3 months of carefully monitored therapy, and my body had responded better than anyone expected. Pregnancy still wasn't guaranteed, but the possibility existed now in a way it hadn't before. And strangely, it mattered less than I thought it would. Whether we had biological children or adopted or designated a successor from another line, we'd figure it out together. The future felt open instead of closed, full of options instead of limitations. "There's Marcus," Roland said quietly, nodding toward the edge of the dance floor. I followed his gaze and found my ex-mate standing with Celeste, both of them watching us with expressions I couldn't quite read. Not hostile exactly, but not friendly either. "Should we?" I started. "Only if you want to." I considered it. 6 months ago, seeing Marcus would have sent me spiraling, would have dredged up every insecurity and shame I'd been carrying. But now I just felt nothing. Not anger, not pain, just a distant sense of gratitude that things had ended the way they did. Because if Marcus hadn't rejected me, I never would have been at that festival, never would have kissed a stranger in a moment of reckless defiance, never would have found exactly where I belonged. "I'm good," I said. "Let him watch. Let them all watch." Roland's smile turned wicked. "Have I mentioned how much I love when you get confident?" "Once or twice." "Not nearly enough then." The dance ended, and we stepped off the floor to scattered applause. Several pack members approached to offer congratulations or discuss pack business, and I fell into the familiar rhythm of palace life, smiling, listening, making the right connections. It was exhausting sometimes, but it was also fulfilling in ways I'd never expected. "Your Majesty?" A young Omega approached hesitantly. Barely 18 if I had to guess. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to thank you. For the reforms. My sister, she has the same condition you do. And before, she thought she'd never be able to find a mate. But now, her eyes filled with tears. Now she has hope. Because of you. My throat tightened. What's your name? Lyra, your majesté. Lyra, tell your sister something for me. Tell her she was always enough. The reforms didn't make her valuable, they just made everyone else finally see what was already there. The girl nodded, tears spilling over, and impulsively hugged me before remembering protocol and jerking back. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. It's fine, I said, returning the embrace. Completely fine. She hurried away, and I felt Roland's arm slide around my waist. You're going to make me cry in public, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Can't have that. Very unkingly. Extremely unkingly. He pressed a kiss to my temple. Come on, there's something I want to show you. He led me through the crowd, past the dancers and the tables laden with food, out into the gardens where fairy lights had been strung between the trees. We walked the same path I'd taken that night 6 months ago when I'd been running from humiliation and straight into my future. We stopped at the spot where I'd first seen him, where he'd been standing in shadow, watching the crowd with that unreadable expression. I was looking for you, you know, he said quietly, even before I knew what you looked like, even before the bond snapped into place. I felt something pulling me here that night, like fate was trying to tell me to pay attention. And then I kissed you. And then you kissed me. He turned to face me fully, both hands coming up to frame my face. Do you remember what you said afterward? When you realized who I was? I said a lot of things, most of them mortifying. You said you shouldn't have been there, that you shouldn't have done any of it. His thumbs brushed across my cheekbones. But Aveline, you were exactly where you were supposed to be, doing exactly what you needed to do, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful that you were brave enough to take that chance. I wasn't brave, I said, though my voice came out thick with emotion. I was desperate and humiliated and not thinking straight. You were brave, he corrected, because even when you thought you had nothing left to lose, you still reached for something that might make you happy. That's courage. That's strength. That's everything I love about you. The words still hit me like a physical force, even after 6 months of hearing them. I didn't think I'd ever get used to being loved like this completely, unconditionally, for exactly who I was. I love you too, I said, and the words came easier now than they had the first time I'd said them. Even when you're being stubborn about grain distribution. He laughed and pulled me close, resting his forehead against mine. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll never kiss strangers at masquerade balls again. I pretended to consider it. I don't know. It worked out pretty well last time. Aveline. Fine, I promise. Though technically you won't be a stranger anymore. So if I kiss you at a masquerade ball... He cut me off with a kiss, and I melted into it, wrapping my arms around his neck. It still felt like that first kiss in some ways electric, and consuming and right in a way that defied logic. But it also felt different, deeper, layered with 6 months of learning each other, fighting together, building something that was ours. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he kept his arms around me. No more masks, he said quietly. No more pretending. No more wondering if we're enough for each other. No more masks, I agreed. We stood there in the garden, wrapped in each other in fairy lights, and the promise of a future we'd fought for. Around us, the festival continued music and laughter, and the same celebration of abundance that had been happening for generations. But for me, it meant something different now. Not abundance of fertility, or bloodline, or political connections. Abundance of choice, of possibility, of being seen for who I truly was and loved anyway. I'd kissed a stranger to feel whole, to prove to myself and everyone watching that I still had value even after being rejected. I'd been desperate and reckless, and convinced I was making a terrible mistake. Instead, I'd found a kingdom that finally saw me, and a king who'd been searching for me all along. Ready to go back? Roland asked, gesturing toward the lights and music. I looked at the festival, at the life waiting for us inside those walls, the challenges and responsibilities and endless political dances, the council meetings and public appearances and weight of a crown I was still learning to wear. And then I looked at him, at the man who'd changed everything by simply refusing to let me run. Ready, I said, and hand in hand, we walked back into the light. Together. Thank you for listening to another emotional, magical shifter romance here on Tina Romance Library. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, so you never miss more powerful, heart-gripping romance stories.